Africa has boundless potentials in trade. It has one of the largest resource bases of any continent in the world. It has arable lands for agriculture and great water bodies to power irrigation and manufacturing. The continent has more than 55 countries, all blessed and strengthened in different proportions from oil to solid minerals and agricultural produce. Its potential to manufacture is enormous. However, it's hardly seen. Africa has the lowest amount of intra-regional trades in the world and is also battling a landscape difficult to beat, prosecute, and traverse. With a massive number of diversities and national areas of focus, the continent needs trade to be integrated, as that's where its greatest possibilities are. Welcome to VSA. I'm Sulaiman. African Continental Free Trade Agreement has was engendered to promote integration on the continent, with many African countries hardly trading with one another. Integration became a problem. Oftentimes, it's easier to travel to another continent than within Africa, and this has led to the attention paid on trade as a leeway. The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement was expected to make the difference in trade and integration and how countries integrated amongst one another. After agreeing to the agreement in 2019, COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 scuttled many countries' plans on regional integration as borders were closed. With the removal of tariffs on goods, the value of intra-African trade is expected to rise to $70 billion by 2040, depending on liberalization efforts. Currently, intra-African exports is about 15 to 17% of the total African exports, with Europe having 69%, Asia 59%, and North America 31%. Regional economic communities are also key to the achievement of trades and integration, with the Maghreb comprising the North African countries and the East African community having the highest integration. West African bloc ECOWAS currently has the least integration, with issues such as insecurity too some of the problems. Now, Michael Tawadrous, President, Egyptian Community Association in Nigeria, joins me live in the studio, and also joining me from South Africa is Matthew Parks, who is a trade unionist. Matthew, good to see you again, and thanks for your time. Let's start with you, Matthew. You're in South Africa presently. Let's start talking about some of the biggest challenge affecting regional integration on the continent.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. And apologies that I'm sitting in a little bit of a dark space right now. We've currently got electricity load shedding in my area of Cape Town. So perhaps that's symbolic of the challenge we face in terms of promoting African integration and trade amongst African countries. So, I think from South Africa's side is that one is that there is no integration across the continent in many areas. For example, the railway network in South Africa has different gauges than those of neighboring countries. You might find that many countries were simply viewed as second thoughts in terms of development for ports of entry. Many of them have only received little attention to developing local industries as well. In South Africa, we've had a huge debate over many years, we're still working on it, that not only should we mine minerals from the ground, but we should look at beneficiating them, making them into finished products. So we don't just export them to Europe and then import the finished products back from Europe, but we should fully develop and promote them here to export to the rest of the world. We've had huge difficulties, for example, that often we are very consumer-driven as economies in Africa, and we simply seek to import cheap goods, often of poor quality, from Asia. Instead of seeing how can we develop local industry, we should really be much cheaper to do so because of geography, being close by and so forth, being better in tune to consumer needs. But we often feel that there's a lack of a concerted plan by governments across the continent, including South Africa. There's a lack of coordination with businesses as well. and also lack of coordination and kind of consumer education campaigns too. So there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done. We are hopeful that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is still in its baby steps, can help to turn the tide around, to help us look at developing local manufacturing capacities, but also helped us to promote trade amongst the continent. And I think maybe lastly is that if you look at any African country and see who are the top trading partners of those countries, it's almost invariably European countries, maybe the former colonial power, the United States, China. It's very rarely other African countries, and that it's often just the exception when it does happen.
You know, Matthew, I like the way you started off by letting us in on exactly what the challenges are, and top of it is also what Nigeria is dealing with, talking about power. You just gave us the example of load shedding, and these are some of the key things that will also, you know, ultimately affect trade. Let's come back to the studio where we have Michael, and Michael will help us here look at the same issues which Matthew has highlighted, talking about the challenges. You're an entrepreneur, and at least you should also have a better or first-hand understanding of what some of these challenges are.
Good evening, Sulaiman. Thank you for having me today.
No, I'm excited having you here live.
Thank you very much. So, as regarding the challenges that we are facing in the integration in Africa, I agree with Matthew. We're actually walking with the baby steps into this integration. I look at it from another point of view as well. If we are talking about integration and on ground, there is nothing happening for the integration. I will share one personal experience in my own company. You know, I run a furniture company, and we had some surplus of production. So I looked at the option of exporting to a neighboring country like Ghana. I explored the option. I called the forwarding agent. We called the forwarding agent, and we looked at the cost of forwarding goods from here to a neighboring country like Ghana. And I was stunned by a bill of above $10,000 for 40 feet, not a container, but a trailer, because it was going by road. So that cost was very expensive compared to a cost of goods that I'm shipping to my USA office. Which is equivalent.
Hold on.
Yes,
let me break it down now. The cost to ship that,
goods,
you know, surplus to a neighboring country like Ghana, from Nigeria to Ghana, was
it was above $10,000.
And it's cheaper for you to do the same thing.
Yes, the
to
same
the United
size
States.
of to the United States of America, which is crossing the ocean and so on. So it was approximately, the last consignment we sent, it was for $5,400 or $5,000. It doesn't pass $6,000. So the cost, you know, Ghana is just like, is closer than Abuja, or almost like Abuja. So comparing the cost, we are talking about integration and the common trades agreement that it should be effective. And that was not helping at all. We are still talking about integration. We don't have a common railway that connects Africa together, like other continents that, like if you look at the European Union, look how the integration is very effective there. Free trade and one currency and a lot of things. When we are talking about integration, we are not doing on any of the things that are meant to be done, actually.
Let me bring in Matthew. Matthew, you heard Michael, and you've also heard his personal experience, and it brings us to some of the key things that will pose a big challenge when we talk about integration. Transportation, road network is very key here. Does that also resonate with some of the findings or your personal experience?
No, it does. I mean, I think you know that often the flight connections are better from African countries to France or to Europe than amongst African countries themselves. It's often very difficult. You find many people from West Africa might need to fly to Paris and then to fly back. I think we also have a huge problem of corruption at our border posts. We've seen in South Africa at our border posts with Mozambique, with Zimbabwe, that there's deep corruption just amongst the customs officials themselves. We have huge problems around getting goods through the ports, the border posts on time. So at our border post with Zimbabwe, of which we only have one, the queues of the trucks bringing goods to and fro can sit at those border posts for days on end. We've got huge problems, for example, around our ports, where there's long queues of ships, sometimes for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, wanting to get the goods through the ports or out of the ports. So it really is a huge problem. We have to fix it quickly, otherwise we're simply going to be displaced and overtaken by other countries. So if you look at China, it heavily invests in ports. It's very competitive. And if you don't start investing here, we'll simply be left behind. Other countries will displace us, and our own consumers will then just simply buy goods from other countries. And that'll further decimate local manufacturing industries. But also you have a huge challenge, for example, in the US and Europe, agriculture is heavily subsidized. So the United States is requiring or demanding for South Africa to agree to import a certain amount of chicken, basically dumping it here. That also threatens local agricultural capacity too. We have similar problems with Brazil, dumping subsidized sugar in South Africa. And again, it threatens local manufacturing. So it's a constant juggling act. And of course, I think the political reality is African countries don't have the political muscle at times to negotiate as equals with countries in Europe, the US, China, Brazil, etc.
Let me jump in here, Matthew, for a bit before we come back to Michael here in the studios. Quickly, off the top of my head, I'm trying to hazard, some reasons why this is so. You both, just like other entrepreneurs, have also expressed such a challenge dealing with other African countries, which shouldn't be so. It was only recently we both had that conversation about businesses and how people have migrated from one part of the continent to another to seek, to eke a living. Now, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which was actually designed to largely help this integration, hasn't actually kicked off, full throttle. But do you think African governments have shown enough commitment to ensuring that it does work?
To be honest, I don't think so. I think many of the problems we have here, you cannot blame it on any other country. Corruption is a domestic issue, and local politicians, local governments have to take responsibility for it. Yes, there's the issues of historical legacy of colonialism and all of that, unfair trading practices, sure. But we've seen other countries in the developing world have long moved past African countries. You can look at South Korea, which was devastated by war. Singapore, with little resources, have emerged into first world countries. So there is a real political failure on African governments' independence, to be honest, most of them. We hope that some of the governments will now start turning the tide, and there have been some positive noises in some parts of the continent. I think in Kenya, we've seen some positive examples. I think in Botswana, there's positive examples, Mauritius and so forth. But to be honest, those are also very far and few. And every time you make some progress here and there, you do see setbacks. For example, what's happening in Guinea-Conakry, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, etc. So, but look, at the end of the day, it's up to us. It's up to us to clean up corruption. It's up to us to enforce the rule of law. And again, that's how you're going to help to attract investors, domestic and foreign. And that's how you're going to help nurture the local economic development.
Let me bring this now that where you left off to Michael. He just said something about the local investors and growing the local economy. Now, you're in Nigeria. Perhaps other Africans watching would like to know how it's been like, irrespective of the kind of integration, the challenges you have when you try to move from one part of the continent to the other. Now, let's talk about your base of operation. How has it been business-wise? Matthew and I, we spoke about some of the challenges South Africans are having, talking about some local business versus people who have come to, live amongst them doing business. So when you first stepped foot in Nigeria, how did you foresee the plan to establish your business? Because I see you have a lot of people across the continent who work for you, Nigerians, non-Nigerians.
Yeah, as per your question about how do I see Nigeria, I see Nigeria as one of the most blessed country in the world. You have a lot of mineral resources. You have oil, you have gas. When I came to Nigeria, is for any businessman is a very attractive business place. But that is aside. we have a lot of challenges here. We cannot hide it. We can talk about the blessing we have in the country, but in the other side, we have a lot of challenges. We have the infrastructure challenges. I can't be sending consignments from here to Abuja, and it takes, for example, 1 full day to go to Abuja, while in the same destination in any other country or a developed country, it takes just few hours. You know, when we are talking about infrastructure, it's something that can reduce the overall cost on the goods. You know, at the end of the day, it's not me that I'm gonna bear the cost, but it's the end users.
That's true.
Yeah, for the challenges that we have as well, we have a problem with our port. It's always congested. We are just talking about a port that just opened because of the strike and so on. A lot of problems goes on in the port. I would also like to talk about the challenge of my own industry, which is furniture. I have visited so many countries that they have an organized market for the materials where, like the materials you need to buy for your own industry. Here in Nigeria, we don't have any organized market for our raw materials that we need for our own industry, the furniture industry. And same goes on for other industries as well. I have visited some countries where they have a very modern, organized market for such raw materials when you want to start your own industry. So these are the challenges that we face on a daily basis. But every challenge comes with solutions, and that's what keeps us up and running.
We'll come back to talk about the solutions. But again, when you talk about raw materials, it gives me the sense that you actually manufacture, you make these furniture here in Nigeria.
Yes, of course, yeah. I produce here. We have our facilities, production facilities here in Nigeria.
Let me bring in Matthew. Matthew, you help us here how it works. You're a unionist, and listening to Michael and some of the challenges, he's also mentioned ports, which you also mentioned in your openings. How does it work when a country or government across the continent leaves the entrepreneur all by himself to ensure that no matter what kind of challenge or challenges he or she is dealing with, no one, when I mean no one, policies, actions from government don't help these people to see that ultimately they get reprieve. As he said, who bears the brunt? The end user.
No, it's difficult. You're right, it's the end users, the consumers who bear the brunt because they have a lack of choice. It's workers who bear the brunt because they lose their jobs. It's government which suffers because it's denied tax revenue. Companies could have existed. When companies close, they retrench workers, they don't pay workers' wages. And I think across Africa, including South Africa, there's enough common interest between government, which needs to see society develop, needs to collect taxes, between business, which needs to make profit, but also needs to have basic services in place so that it can operate optimally, like electricity, paved roads, water, and so forth, ports which work, railway networks which function. And of course, consumers need to have goods available at cheap prices. Workers need to have jobs. I think for us, the solutions are not that complicated. It's not that difficult to build electricity power stations, especially now when you have renewable energy available. It's not that difficult to get your ports working, but it requires real political will by government. It requires a bit of smart thinking as well about how to do things. But I think also it requires us, if we want to get out of these islands, because for example, South Africa can't be an island of prosperity, so to speak, in a sea of poverty. It requires us to work very closely together as regions, as the continent, to see how can we complement each other, how can we help develop the Maputo port, Mombasa, Dar es Salaam, Durban, Cape Town, for the betterment of the continent. How can we really invest in our railway networks and so forth? But we don't do it, and at times it creates huge issues. And then we become surprised later when conflicts arise and so forth. We're surprised when other countries in the world don't take us seriously, because if we don't take ourselves seriously, why would they do it? But the solutions are there. I don't think there's a single country in Africa where people don't have a passion to uplift themselves, to create opportunities, to learn, to improve their lives. but it requires governments really to become serious about what we need to do.
And still staying with you, Matthew, and talking about the single currency, which is also a drawback. Recall it was around 2009 when the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi actually mooted the idea, but it would seem as if the AU and some other regional bloc have actually abandoned that thinking. How would that have helped if the continent had a single currency to help drive trade?
Look, it can help. I mean, I think we must be realistic. It won't happen overnight. It took Europe, half a century with much greater resources and political support and will to achieve the euro. And even that has had huge difficulties, especially for the new countries entering it. It wasn't an easy thing. You've seen, how Britain long resisted and so forth. But I think we do have the foundations within Africa for it. I think in the West African states, which often are a bit further ahead than the rest of the continent in terms of regional integration through ECOWAS, I think you do have elements of it. I think in some of the Francophone countries in West and Central Africa, with all of its issues of being pegged to the franc, I think there has a bit of an element to it. But even in Southern Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, and Namibia, through the Southern African Customs Union, in effect, you do have a common currency, which is the South African rand. Yes, those countries have their own currencies, but they're pegged to the rand, and the rand can be used there interchangeably. So I think the foundations are there, but perhaps we need to start the foundations first. For example, on a common railway network, common customs duties, enforcing customs as well from goods coming from outside the continent, improving the road network, electricity network, communications, and so forth. I think once you get those foundations, then the more politically symbolic things of free travel, a common currency will fall into place over time. It won't be overnight, but I think let's lay the foundations, and gradually it'll become more and more feasible, so to speak.
Okay, let me come back to the studios here with Michael. And Matthew and I, we had this conversation about happenings in South Africa. And he gave a sense of what exactly is happening, talking about the Dudula movement, where some of the locals in some of the suburbs are saying the non-indigens have actually taken off their jobs. But in your case, reading up about your business and yourself, we realize that you have a lot of people, to the extent that traditional rulers and some of the indigens are all with you on this. So perhaps if we can talk about some solutions to some of the things Matthew and I discussed earlier on the show. What are the key things some businesses or business owners can do within their locality to ensure that there's this friendship, there's this partnership, there's this love, as against what we've seen among some of our few African brothers and sisters?
Yeah. See, I just want to comment for something.
No, go ahead, by all means.
Yes. I was thinking with Matthew about the single currency and the integration. I was looking at having such thing. How can, if you are fighting with your neighbor or you have clashes with your neighbor, you won't have anything in common. Here we are talking about countries. And how can we have a custom union? How can we have a single currency, a real way that connects us together if we are clashing with each other? We have a lot of clashes between some African countries that is making that not to move smoothly. We have to solve our problems ourselves. I have been always saying that African, there is nobody that will come help us from outside. Africa themselves, we will have the solution to our problems. We will help each other to grow. I was looking at, exchanging the ideas, exchanging the experience. If one country have an experience in the solar system and they got it right, other countries, they can exchange the experience. But all that will not be happening if we are still clashing with each other.
So you don't need to reinvent the wheel, just copy and paste. If it works for
exactly,
South Africa, copy and paste in Nigeria.
In Nigeria,
if that's
exactly,
what you need.
Exactly. Yeah, we are still having problem with light here, with power in Nigeria, while in Egypt they have surplus of power, generating power. We have to go and study their own idea. How did they achieve that? You know, I was reading one day about the experience in Egypt of having the 100 hectare of solar panel, it's generating, I don't know how many megawatt, so it's something that they have done. We have the same environment, similar environment here. Why don't we copy the same experience? How did you achieve that? How did they achieve that? So we can do it here. So I believe that will help us improving each other. As per regard,
partnership.
The partnership with Nigeria. You know, I came to Nigeria 17 years ago, and since I came to Nigeria, I said this is the place I would like to establish.
That's almost 2 decades now.
Yes. It is almost 2 decades actually. Yes, and since I came to Nigeria, I see a welcoming people, and it's place that I said I will establish my business here. I will grow my business here, and that's why I did all the investments that I have done here. And because of my contribution into the society, I was even made a chief. Me and my wife, we was made a chief not quite long in this land.
I'm coming. You're a chief.
Yes.
You have a traditional.
I have a traditional title. Yeah. Title is Tayishi of Iru land, Victoria Island. Yeah.
Of Iru land.
Iru land, yes, where we are now. Yes. So that was like payback from the society to my contribution, what I have done here. That shows how Nigerians are very welcoming and very rewarding as well.
We'll come back. Matthew, we'll come back to him so that he tells us more, because our last conversation because you spoke, so well about how we can live in peace, harmoniously, and it still resonates with a lot of Africans who watched us when we spoke about the Dudula movement. And now Michael has said that Africans have the manual, to actually fix their problems. And you also, gave a sense to that, the last time we spoke. Let us in on what key things Africa should start looking towards when it comes to, collaborating, because you said something about peer review mechanism. We should review what works for Matthew. If I do need it in my country, then I should reach out to Matthew and see that actually is implemented.
No, I mean, you're completely right. I mean, we should be doing it, and I don't think often we do it. Sometimes we should be collaborating and complementing each other. Instead, we actually end up creating conflicts. And often it's more difficult because both countries might face similar challenges. If you look at the issue of water scarcity, there's really tensions bubbling beneath the surface between Egypt and Ethiopia around the Nile River. Ethiopia is desperately looking for using the river for electricity. It needs electricity like any other economy. It's got a huge population, desperately poor. Electricity is critical to agriculture, to industry, to education, every part of life. But of course, Egypt naturally fears that if the water levels are diverted from the Nile River, it could have a devastating effect to the Nile River in Egypt. And if you look at, I think 90%, and Michael would correct me, but I think about 90% of Egypt's population lives along the Nile River. So any small tinkering with it could have a huge impact upon Egypt's agriculture, upon its water security supplies, and so forth. So instead of us looking at ways to complement each other, we're actually looking at our own short-term goals, which are legitimate, but sacrificing opportunities to collaborate on longer-term issues. And again, it does require real political commitment and leadership. I think there is positive examples. If we look at what's happening currently in the northern part of Mozambique, where there's a small insurgent conflict taking place in Cabo Delgado, but we've seen the neighboring states through SADC, the regional body, have come to Mozambique's assistance. We've seen South Africa, Lesotho, Botswana, Zimbabwe, I think Tanzania, if I'm right, have deployed soldiers to try to assist Mozambique. Even Rwanda, which is outside of the SADC bloc, has deployed soldiers to try to assist, because you can't afford for these countries to develop if there's conflict in Mozambique. There'll be a spillover of refugees. which investors from overseas will come to a place where there's conflict, where there's violence. It is going to drain resources. So I think those are the kind of positive things we need to see being done. The other positive examples, and I might be a little bit biased towards the Southern African region, but I mean, when Mozambique has experienced, devastating water floods in the central part of Mozambique, South Africa has often come to its assistance to deploy military personnel to try to assist it. So I think those are the kind of things, but I think the real thing which we're lacking is to promote trade and investment. Once we can start unlocking that is really going to help unlock the economies, and it's going to help build a common sense of identity and a common investment and prosperity in each other's countries.
Matthew, we'll take a break. When we'll come back, Albert, speaking with you and Michael on the way forward, and also talk about some of the key challenges. We haven't actually talked about security, which is actually dealing a big blow to the continent in many ways. That's when we return. Join us again. Well, it's our home run here on Village Square Africa on News Central Television. And of course, well, we're talking about trade integration on the continent. How does the landscape affect trading and a few other things? I still have with me here on the square Matthew Parks. He's live in South Africa. And right here with me in the studios is Michael Tawadrous. Now, gentlemen, thank you for your time. And the continent needs to actually push this forward. Let's start with you, Michael. Looking at the people and governments, let's ask the straight question for a businessman who's in Lagos, Nigeria, doing business. What are the key challenges away from doing business with other parts of the continent? What are the key drawbacks for you in the last 17 years?
Yeah, actually, if we are looking for solutions, there are actually a lot of solutions to the problem we are facing now.
A lot?
Yeah, a lot, but they are very expensive. Have a railway that connects Africa together is one of the solutions. Yes, a single currency. All what we spoke about is part of the solutions. We are looking at the women engagement in the workforce. We have 1.2 billion people living in Africa. Half of them are men. The remaining half, the other 50% are females. But if you look at the percentage of the contribution of female to the workforce, is actually 33%. If we can empower the women in Africa the same way and encourage them to join the workforce, same like men, we will have a 15% or 16% increase in our total GDP. I'm talking about the contribution of male and female into the total GDP of Africa. So I think women empowerment is something very key. that can help us.
I think there's no better time for us bringing this up. But let me bring in Matthew. Matthew, I think I spoke also recently with Fatma, who is a lawyer in Tanzania, and she said to me that time was where a young Tanzanian girl, once she gets pregnant, that's the end of education for her until the coming of President Suluhu Samia Hassan. Now, some of the things Michael has raised, now we're talking about the people, Africa and its people, our women, our girl child. Some other countries on the continent still have this, less attention given to our women folk. Is it something that, for instance, COSATU as a union or some other parts of the continent should be looking to helping bridge that gap and create a better understanding of equality and inclusiveness?
It's something that COSATU has spent a lot of time looking at. Of course, we look at first South Africa because you must make sure your own house is clean before you can comment on your neighbors' houses. And of course, like any other country, we've had issues of the oppression of women, of discrimination, of sexism, and so forth. So for many, many decades, there's been a huge campaign to get women to join trade unions, to get women and girls to get an education, to complete the schooling, to help put in place support to get young women to go to university, get the skills. We've also fought and campaigned for laws to make sure there's equality at the workplace, to outlaw discrimination, even to require employers to pay equal salaries for equal work, irrespective if it's done by a woman or a man. So those things I can say over the past decades, they don't change things overnight, but they start to change things slowly, bit by bit. So I can say, for example, that in South Africa, half of our cabinet are women ministers. Many of our premiers, our provincial governors are women. The president of our COSATU Trade Union Federation is a woman as well. Half of our leadership are women. So it doesn't change things overnight. It doesn't mean it's going to resolve all the issues. There's still huge issues of violence against women and girls, the pressures when girls fall pregnant to drop out, to go and raise the family. Those are still there. There's still the issue of discrimination at the workplace as well against women, of sexual harassment. But I think maybe South Africa might be a little bit more fortunate, so to speak, than other countries because it's a relatively industrialized economy, so to speak. I think there is also the element of cultural differences, of religious differences in different parts of the continent. So some parts of the continent, yes, women working, women going to school, women going to university is frowned upon by society. It is going to take time for that evolution of society to catch up. And look, all countries have had to go through the pace. Countries in North America, in Europe and Asia, there's no country which hasn't had to go through, whether the Christian or the Muslim. And at the end of the day, I think the most effective thing, as Michael I think was hinting around, is it makes economic sense for all of your workforce to take part in the economy. It makes sense for families not to depend upon solely the husband or the father to be the breadwinner, but to have both parents bring breadwinners, because that means there's more money for the family. That means there's more security if one parent loses the job. And I think when we really want to realize that, that's going to help unlock the economy, as opposed to us simply relying upon half of the potential workforce to support an entire nation. You can't afford to do it otherwise. If you look at China, they don't do it like that. They want everyone to work, everyone to study. So that's the way for us to go, and we need to move on it, and especially on the issue of education, as Michael is saying.
Let me stay with you, Matthew, for a bit before I come back to Michael. And it has to do with COSATU again, because I kind of like what COSATU is doing. It reminds me of the NLC. But again, a lot of people are saying that as we move on the continent, there seems to be a drawback, losing steam by some of the unions to the extent that some of the key things which the unions used to push on behalf of the people and countries ultimately for the continent are not achieved. Are you as a union having some of the conversations with some regional unions or continental unions to see how best you can actually push some of these developmental plans and projects to see that the continent is on winning ways?
No, there are lots of such discussions because you're right. The interests of workers, whether they're in Cote d'Ivoire, whether they're in Rwanda or Zimbabwe, Angola, they're the same. It's about jobs, it's about decent working conditions, about earning a salary which can take care of your family, knowing that your children's lives will be better than your lives. Those are common interests. And again, I think most trade unions tend to have progressive people looking at the future, not just the economy of today, but the economy of tomorrow. So about the investments in the economy and in infrastructure and so forth. So there is lots of discussions taking place. In fact, currently, the president of COSATU, she's also the president of the Southern African Trade Union Congress. We've got quite good relationships with trade unions across the Southern African region, whether they're Mozambique or Tanzania or Angola, Namibia. Some of those relations actually go back to the days of the liberation struggle as well, between Namibia and South Africa, and so forth. But there's also, I know, a very, very close relationship between actually the Nigerian Labour Congress, the Ghanaian trade union federations, and South Africa's trade union federations. We often have what we call a trilateral between Ghana, South Africa, and Nigerian trade unions. We will come together and try to share ideas, brainstorm, because again, the challenges of corruption are common to all three countries, are common to all countries. The need to see how can trade unions operate more smartly, because the challenges facing workers are not static, they evolve. The fourth industrial revolution we used to talk about as a concept in the future, but with COVID-19, like how the three of us are sitting together virtually, shows that the fourth industrial revolution is here, and it's going to change the nature of work. It's going to displace some jobs, which used to be manual jobs, and replace them with 4IR-driven jobs. So we also have to be creative and say, okay, what can we do to help those workers whose jobs are at risk get the skills needed to ensure they have the job, they match the needs of the jobs of tomorrow, that we help transition them. We're seeing a huge transition right now across the world around energy. We're moving away from coal and even from nuclear to renewable energy, to wind and solar. So that means we've got to look at how we transition those energy workers across the continent. So there's lots of discussions. I think there's also things we need to say, how can we collaborate with each other? We're keen on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement because it can unlock the development of the continent. We can trade with each other, create jobs and so forth, as opposed to just sustaining jobs from Asia at our expense. But we are also very fearful that if South Africa battles the issue of corruption at our ports, at our borders of entry, among customs officials, how much more so might it be a difficult issue in Malawi, a much poorer country, or in Burundi, etc. So it's also about how do we assist each other to develop together and to try to complement each other's work. And it's not going to be easy, but again, I think there's enough that unites the continent to say, yes, we have to move together. And as you're saying, learn from what Europe did, learn from what North America did, learn from what China did. And there are positive examples to pick up there.
Well, I'm happy that you've also, touched on one of the good that COVID gave to the world, talking about this conversation we're having, irrespective of where you are at the moment. And it brings us to job provision and the transfer of talents, Michael, which are not happening at a fast speed on the continent. Yes, how can we show up on that? How can we boost that to ensure that, because it is also one of the key things causing, friction in South Africa. Job creation. How can the continent ensure that our youthful population is engaged?
Yeah, we have very large population here in Nigeria. We are the biggest in Africa, but how many are quality human resources? I believe one of the major things that we need to look at here is development of good quality human resources. Is the lead when we are talking about growth of Africa. How good is the quality of the human resources we have in Nigeria, in Africa in general? So I believe it starts by education. The education system in Africa have to be really improved. And I will come back again to the point of saying copying from other successful stories in different countries. I will take an example. Egypt, when they copied the experience of Japan in their own education, and it have been really working for them. Yes, people are looking at it as something new in Egypt, but is improving the quality of education over there. Nigeria can copy from another successful experience in terms of education as well. I believe education is the key of our solution in terms of training a very good quality of human resources.
Matthew, many countries on the continent are not diversifying enough, and this more or less cuts the extent to which trading is done. How key is diversification to trading and integration?
Sorry, how key is taxation or pacification? I couldn't hear.
No, I'm asking how key is diversification to trading and integration?
Okay. Sorry. It is. I think it's quite key. And again, there's huge opportunities. I mean, I think one challenge for many African countries is a lack of diversification. That many African countries are sadly dependent upon a single agricultural crop or mining product, and so if there's a slump in one product, like you had in Zambia for copper prices, it can have a devastating effect on the economy. Again, for South Africa's side, we're actually quite fortunate. We're not dependent upon a single crop from agriculture, not dependent upon a single mining export or manufacturing product, and that's how it should be. We need to diversify as much as possible because that'll help you to manage the rough tides, which are inevitable. And again, as Michael said, we've got 1.2 million African people. They want all the products. We should be providing for them and creating that competition. We should not be making ourselves into a cheap warehouse for cheap subsidized goods to come in from Brazil, from China, from wherever in the world. There is opportunities here for us. It makes no economic sense for us to buy T-shirts from overseas, to buy cell phones or TVs from overseas, to buy cars, when the capacity is here for all of them. But it does require us to be a little bit smarter at times and to invest in them. And the foundations are there. South Africa's got a very significant car manufacturing industry. We produce about 400,000 cars a year. There's a campaign or program to increase that. But we export those cars, and they're of very high quality. We export them to Europe, to North America. Morocco started to do the same. I think in Nigeria, if I'm right, there's a fledgling car industry. And there has been some discussion between the Nigerian and South African governments, I think, about collaborating between the two. I think there's similar initiatives in Kenya. We should also be a bit smart at times. Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, the electric vehicle giants, he's from Pretoria, South Africa. We should be telling him, come to Africa, we'll give you free land, we'll give you tax holidays, but build your manufacturing plants here for the continent, for African consumption, but also to export to the rest of the world. And again, we have to be aggressive about it. If you look at how China has managed to develop a huge manufacturing capacity, it's because they called in companies from the US to invest there, but they required that after a few years, you needed to hand over that technological capacity, that skills base, to China to grow. And they were very unashamed about it. And now we can see China produces high quality goods. It's a global leader on every single product across the world.
Let me bring this to Michael, because he said something, you said something about your workshop here. And listening to Matthew, he said, sometimes you don't need to go outside the continent. You have, some other countries where you can get your resources or your need, cars. And I'm amazed, time was when a lot of Nigerians would, import furniture. And you say you have a workshop where you manufacture these things here. Now, help us now. Let's plot this into some of the things that Matthew has said. How can these be developed to the extent that some other startups will look towards you? You might not be, in the same business of furniture, but so that they understand that it's doable and it's possible for you to have startups on the continent and grow your business to the extent that it can stand side by side with any outside the continent.
It's true. Actually, when I started developing the production facilities, I looked at the countries where they have the best to give. The best experience in furniture. I looked at a trade map of the world, the total contribution to the furniture in terms of the entire world. I discovered that China contributes 50%, more than 50% actually, of the entire world contribution into furniture.
50?
More than 50 actually. So
I actually thought that was Turkey.
No. Actually, Turkey is less than 5%. is a fraction compared to China. So China produces 50% of the more than 50% of the total world production of furniture. I looked at the experience of China and I said, I need to carry the experience. I'm not talking about quality or not quality or designs or anything at all. I need to carry the experience of China and see how are they successful in doing that. So actually I went to the production facilities there. I visited a lot of production facilities and I copied the ideas, the business models, and I brought it down to Nigeria. And I brought the expatriate. I said, for me to carry these ideas, I can't do it in isolation of the expatriate that are managing the whole process. So I brought the expatriate that are supervising this process. And I had a meeting with all my staff there, and I said, these expatriates are coming to teach you and give you knowledge in the production and new ideas. You have to utilize it because they will not be staying here for long. You have to utilize everything. And that's how I copied the whole process and bring it down to Nigeria. And it has been very successful. I call it as a successful story in terms of business ideas. So we produce today outstanding products that is something that we are proud to say we are exporting to different countries, like the US and so on. And what we need more is just the quality human resources that I was talking about and the proper education, proper training for them.
You know, we're closing on this, but again, I do hope that we'll have time to come back and speak more on these issues. Matthew and Michael, you know, speaking with both of you, what resonates with me is that irrespective of where you're from, you can actually bring to bear some positive change. And it would seem as if Michael listened to Matthew and I when we were talking about some of these key developmental issues that can be brought to bear, you know, to any nation and in any nation by any individual, irrespective of where you're from. And I'm hoping that our conversation today will actually help drive the process in South Africa, drive the process in Nigeria, and drive the process across the continent, irrespective of where you're from. You can actually make a mark, and that's the essence of Village Square Africa, bringing everyone to have a conversation to develop in the continent. I'd like to thank you very much for your time, Matthew Parks, and of course, Michael Tawadrous. I should put the chief there. He just said to us, Matthew, that he's a chief. Let us in on your title again, Michael.
Taishu Iruland.
Oh, that's a big one.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. And I'm Sulaiman. See you again. Bye-bye.